Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome the President and CEO of the George W. Bush Presidential Center, Ken Hirsch.
Good evening, and welcome to Engage at the Bush Center, sponsored by NextPoint. And thank you all for being here, as well as those on the live stream. And thanks to NextPoint for endowing this great program, and we're grateful for KERA's support tonight as our media partner. With our Engage series, our goal is to help increase the understanding of complex issues as we promote the values of freedom, opportunity, accountability, and compassion through our mission of combining both public programming and policy work to ensure opportunity for all, to strengthen democracy, and to advance free societies around the world. Tonight, we have the perfect topic for an election year: how to disagree and do it better. This is a subject that connects nicely with the Bush Institute's work on strengthening our democracy and our ongoing special exhibit, Freedom Matters, which I hope you'll check out as you leave. We're thrilled tonight to have two sitting governors to discuss this idea of managing healthy conflict in a productive manner. Governors are perfect to lead this conversation because they have to run things at their state level, and they have populations who expect those policies to deliver. Utah's Governor Spencer Cox, a Republican, has a long track record of public service, serving as a city council member, a mayor, county commissioner, and a state legislator before being appointed as Utah's lieutenant governor in 2013. He was sworn in as Utah's governor in January of 2021. We're also delighted to have with us Governor Laura Kelly of Kansas, a Democrat. She's in her second term as governor after 4 terms as a state senator. Both Governors Cox and Kelly have worked across party lines to find common ground and deliver solutions for the people of their respective states. As an aside, I would like to urge you all to check out the latest version of our journal, The Catalyst, which you can find at bushcenter.org, which is dedicated the issue to the state of American democracy. And Governor Kelly wrote an essay on restoring trust in government. There's also an interview with President Bush as well in that issue. And to moderate the conversation, we're fortunate to have Krys Boyd of KERA-FM with us tonight. She's the award-winning managing editor and host of the national program Think, which is heard in 220 markets across the country. Governor Cox launched an initiative last year called Disagree Better in his role as chair of the National Governors Association. So why are we doing this? Well, in part because it breaks my heart to hear that Thanksgiving dinners have been ruined over conversations about politics. I long for the day when good old-fashioned family dysfunction ruined dinners and not Joe Biden or Donald Trump. Governor Cox is on a mission to save our dinner table.
I'm Spencer Cox, Republican Governor of Utah.
And I'm Jared Polis, Democratic Governor of Colorado.
And we're here to help save your family dinners.
You know what we're talking about.
You're halfway through your second helping of mashed potatoes when your MAGA uncle decides to share his thoughts on the latest election conspiracy.
We all have that uncle.
Or instead of passing the salt, your woke niece passes along a particularly controversial fact that she read on social media.
Or maybe you're the one with the strong opinions. You know you're right, and the other side is a bunch of misguided weirdos. But there's a healthy way to deal with conflicting opinions. Actually, it's okay to disagree.
It's not just okay, it's crucial.
Did you just disagree with me about disagreeing?
Healthy disagreement means not assuming that the other side is deluded, misinformed, or actively trying to overthrow America.
A little respect and curiosity keeps resentment off the dinner table.
And out of your social media feeds.
Our nation was founded by people who profoundly disagreed.
So next time your uncle, your niece, or anyone else brings up that one topic that just drives you nuts, take a deep breath.
Be curious, ask questions. If you still disagree, that's okay, but you might find that you aren't as far apart as you think.
Conflict isn't bad. It's the way we disagree that matters. Please join us in showing America the right kind of conflict.
Together,
we can disagree better.
And Governor Kelly is doing her part as well.
Hi, I'm Laura Kelly, Democratic Governor of Kansas.
And I'm Mike Parson, Republican Governor of Missouri.
We probably don't agree on much.
And that's why I ordered Kansas City, Missouri barbecue.
And I ordered the good stuff, Kansas City, Kansas barbecue.
But regardless, we're committed to disagreeing better.
Like in 2019, when we came together to end the Kansas City economic border war, which at its heart was just bad policy.
And wasn't in the best interest of Missourians or Kansans? Is that correct?
It is.
Well, we'll just call you neighbors. And like any good neighbor, we'll continue to disagree on plenty of things.
Like barbecue, tax policy, or who's the bigger Chiefs fan?
As the 2024 election cycle heats up, we hope to speak for the entire country in saying,
We don't always have to agree, but we can learn to disagree better.
Please help me welcome to the stage Governor Spencer Cox, Governor Laura Kelly, and Krys Boyd.
Welcome to sunny Dallas, governors.
It feels just like Salt Lake City. This is great. Thanks.
Encouraging people to disagree better is emphatically not encouraging them to agree. It's not the same as civility. It's not the same as bipartisanship, which you don't disagree with necessarily. But talk a little bit more about this concept and why, as chair of the National Governors Association, you made this your issue.
Yeah, so as chair, we get to choose an initiative, and we looked at all the kind of normal initiatives, regular initiatives, I guess. We looked at healthcare, we looked at energy policy, and we had this conversation that we really can't solve any of the biggest issues facing our country if we hate each other. So I started talking to my fellow colleagues about this idea of disagreeing better, and you're right. This isn't just about being nice to each other. Certainly we need that, and I'm going to encourage you to be nicer to each other, but that's not what this is about. One of the criticisms we would hear back is, you just want us to go along to get along, or we all just have to agree. And that's not this. I fear that as a country, we've forgotten how to have conflict and how to disagree without hating or tearing each other down, to disagree in a way that can be actually persuasive over time. But again, most importantly, we used to do this. Our nation, as Governor Polis said, was founded in profound disagreement. But people who are willing to get in a room and have those very hard conversations and stay true to what they believed in, but look for those common ground solutions wherever possible. And that's what we're trying to do. That's why we named this very purposely, disagreeing better. We want disagreement. Disagreement is important to our country and the future of this nation.
Governor Kelly, did this idea resonate with you as soon as you heard about it?
No, not initially. I thought it was cute and a good idea, but I didn't really think it would make a difference. And quite honestly, I had a hard time seeing myself sitting down with somebody that I don't really know that well, but I know that I fundamentally disagree on almost all policies. So I had to really talk myself through it and to try to figure out what good could come from this. And I do believe that these are important conversations that have to take place. We cannot continue down the path that we are. Our politics is so broken that it's become, as we know, dysfunctional, particularly at the national level, but at times at the state level too. And so we've got to have these conversations, and we've got to collectively figure out how to disagree better.
You made this video with Governor Parson of Missouri. Has your working relationship changed?
We've actually always had a pretty decent working relationship. We haven't had to work together that much, but when I first came into office, I think you heard me say on the video that we came together to solve the economic border wars. And what had been happening, Missouri and Kansas butt up against, there's really a sidewalk or a street separating us, some places a river, but what had been happening is, Kansas has been offering incentives for businesses, to move 3 blocks across the state line, and then Missouri would come back and offer them more incentives, and 2 years later they'd move back. And we were spending hundreds of millions of dollars on incentives that we really needed to be investing elsewhere. And so we did come together and agreed on that. And from that, I think that we sort of set a foundation for a decent relationship, where we could, when necessary, come together and work together. For instance, we were able to attract the 2026 World Cup. Kansas City the region will be a site for part of the World Cup. And that really required us coming together, our teams coming together and putting together a proposal that we would then sell to the World Cup Federation, and it worked.
Governor Cox, most of us judge leaders based on whether or not they enact policies that we agree with or whether or not they're a member of the party that we affiliate with. You think we should also judge them according to how they express disagreement?
Yeah, I do, and I so appreciate Governor Kelly's candor in the way she responded to this, and I knew that would be the response, and so we reached out to experts, policy experts at places like Stanford and Dartmouth and Duke that have these depolarization labs to try to figure out what works. And one of the things I'm trying to do is to help elevate this as an issue, just like economic development or abortion, that how people treat the people they disagree with might be the single most important issue in our country today, more important than a politician's stance on economic development or abortion. That our nation, and Governor Kelly mentioned this, that we can't keep going down this path, and that's what the experts are telling us. The people who study this and look at failed democracies all over the world are telling us that we are passing every one of those red flags towards the potential for failed institutions and failed states. Like this should be on everybody's list, not just kind of a sub-level list. But I encourage people, when you go to a town hall, ask them to give you an example of a time when they've worked with somebody on the other side, or when they've disagreed better, and let's make people respond to that. Let's make people, because we know that, again, according to the data, that 70% of Americans hate what is happening in politics today, and yet neither party is responding to them. We have this market failure. So how do we actually get the politicians to start listening to we the people who hate what's happening out there?
This is what you call the exhausted majority.
Correct, yeah.
Governor Kelly, so often we think about political communication as what our leaders want us to know. You have incorporated listening sessions in your time as governor. Can you talk about how those play out when the people that you listen to think you're going the wrong way?
Well, I actually developed that style of leadership probably when I was 17 or 18, and I was working with some really tough kids from New York City up at a camp where we would take them, and it was really hot times in the cities then. So they came up pretty agitated, and I really found that the less I talked, the more I listened, the more I could help them enjoy this experience, and the safer I could keep myself, quite honestly. So I've always approached things that way. My initial training was actually in mental health, so which is where you listen to be able to problem solve. So I've taken that into my political world when I was in the Senate for 14 years. A lot of it was working across the aisle. A lot of it spent, listening, trying to find that common ground where I could get some of what I wanted, as long as I could bring some folks along. So that whole idea of listening has been the way that I've actually structured my entire administration. All of my cabinet agencies use that format in order to develop our transportation program, to figure out how we're going to fix our foster care system. We really do bring in stakeholders from local level, private business, whatever it needs to be, and then we listen, and they often come up with the solutions.
Does something change when people realize you actually are listening, not waiting for your turn to talk next?
Well, nothing changed because I've never been one of those who talks first and forever. But I think I've seen it. Well, I had a group, rural telecommunications folks in my office today, and they were concerned. There's a federal program that will be operated through my Department of Commerce, and they were concerned that their views weren't going to be, taken into account. And so I said, well, I'd be surprised if Commerce isn't planning to set up, stakeholder meetings and bring everybody to the table. But I said, if they haven't planned to do that, they will, and we will get that done. And immediately, you could just see people relaxing and recognizing that, and they trust me enough because of the way we've done everything else, that I meant it, and they'll come to the table and be able to express themselves.
What kind of listening should we do when we want to disagree better?
Yeah, well, I love this. A politician who actually listens. I think it's like a unicorn. Most politicians think they have two mouths and one ear, but the type of listening is really important. One of the just practical ways that we talk about disagreeing better is when you find yourself in a high conflict situation. And again, this is just conflict resolution. This isn't just specific to politics. It's everywhere. It's in your families, dinner table, workspaces, but especially around politics. We encourage people to ask the question or the demand to tell me more about what you believe. Right? So to start there, so we're, whatever it is we're disagreeing on, I'm going to ask Governor Kelly, tell me more about why you feel this way. And that does several things that I think are really important. One, it lets her know that I'm interested in what she has to say. So we tell people to be curious. Curiosity is so important. And so now she's feeling better about this already. Two, it actually requires her to think about why she believes what she believes. I think far too often today we're taking our cues from social media or cable news that I believe this because Tucker Carlson told me I have to believe this last night, or whatever it is, right? And so it actually requires the other person to think about what they believe. Number three, it gives me a chance to cool down because I'm angry, I'm upset, I'm mad, I want to fight, and that's how I'm wired. I went to law school. I was a trial attorney. Like, my nature is just to tear people apart, tear them down. I trained at it. I'm good at it, right? So now it gives me a chance to breathe and settle down. And sometimes I have to ask the question a couple times to get them. But listening not to argue, but listening to understand is a lost art today. And it changes everything when you're actually listening to really understand. And the cool part about it is if I'm willing to listen to her, she's much more likely to listen to me when I get a chance. And if we really get to the core of what she believes, there may be, not always, there may be an opportunity for us to build on that foundation, right? So maybe whatever we're arguing about, she believes it because she loves her family or she loves her country. And I'm like, oh, well, I love my country too. Let's start there, right? And now we've got a foundation to start to build on, and maybe we can find some common ground.
Often I think we don't listen because we're so sure we know what the other side, the other person is going to say. Apparently research reveals we're wrong a lot of the time. Have you both experienced that in the conversations you've had with your colleagues and constituents?
Oh, I've been amazed I've been in Kansas politics now for 20 years, and because I do listen, and I think as you listen, they'll start spilling out all sorts of things, and you can find that one nugget of common ground, and you can build so much on just one thing that you have in common. And so, I do think that good listening, solid listening, makes a huge difference in your ability to work with and get things done.
Yeah, Krys, I completely agree. Look, the data is fascinating on this. One of the craziest things about where we are as a nation right now is that we are as polarized as we've ever been since the Civil War, right? And I think everybody agrees with that. Yeah, I see that all the time. Except that we're not. if you look at the partisan polarization, which is what we actually believe, so if you look at kind of the median Democrat and the median Republican and what we believe on almost every issue, we're like this far apart. But there's something called affect polarization, which is not what we actually believe, but what we think the other side believes. And so if you ask Republicans what Democrats believe, or ask Democrats what Republicans believe, we're this far apart. And the politicians have figured this out, right? Too many of them. And so they've been able to capitalize on that by making us still believe that we are this far apart and that we're, the other side, those people are trying to destroy our country. Those people are evil. Those people are coming for whatever it is they're coming for, right? And so then this tribalistic nature takes place. But when we actually sit down and have the conversations, most of the time we'll figure out we're not as far apart as we think we are, and that's where there are real opportunities for solutions.
How does that kind of distrust, if we don't seek to get closer to the truth, set us up for political violence?
Well, look, trust is something that my team is tired of me talking about. I talk about trust all of the time. I think trust is the kind of the capital of governing. It's how we're able to get anything done. Trust in our institutions is failing quickly. There is something called the Edelman Trust Barometer, and they look at, I think, 50 different countries, but the U.S. is one of those, and they look at trust in various institutions. They look at trust in business, trust in nonprofits, trust in the media, and trust in government. And in the United States, across all four of those categories, trust is falling rapidly, and that probably doesn't surprise you. A few years ago, they actually defined trust for the first time because they just left it open, like, do you trust government, yes or no? But what is trust? And they said trust is a formula, and that formula is actually pretty simple. It's just two things, right? It's competency. So are you good at what you do? And it's ethical behavior. So are you good? So are you a good person, and are you good at what you do? And I think in our daily lives, we understand this, right? Like, there are people that are really good at what they do, but they're not ethical, and you would never let them watch your kids or borrow your car, right? Conversely, there are people that are just the best people in the world. They're so ethical, and they're completely incompetent. And you also would not trust them with your kids or your car, right? So both of those things. But when you lose trust the ability of our institutions to function, and so we talk about that all the time. So how does that apply to this piece? If we have to be competent as governors. That's why Frank Luntz said the governors are the last adults in the room, and I use that all the time. Not all governors. There are a few at the kids' table, but most governors, as you said, we have to get things done, right? We have to be competent, right? So then the question is the ethical behavior, and that's, I think, part of that ethics is how we treat other people, especially those who disagree with us. And when people see the performative piece of Congress, those who aren't actually trying to do anything, they're not trying, there's no competence, they're not trying to fix any of our problems, they start to lose trust. And specifically, again, when you have politicians and people take their cues, when we're saying that you can't trust the other side because they're evil and they want to destroy you, well, I just think, there's nothing less patriotic, there's nothing more un-American than hating our fellow Americans. If you hate half our country, you don't love our country. And so how do we as politicians be more ethical on that side and to saying, yes, I'm going to attack your ideas, but I'm not going to attack you as an individual. And that's deeply important. If we're going to preserve everything that has made our country great and literally preserve our country, I think we have to start doing that again.
I also think in that context that we really have to take a good look at our systems, which I think promote this bad behavior. I think you did one of these with Governor Polis from Colorado, and one of the answers that he had about being able to work together and the sides being apart talked about how in Colorado, in their legislature, that every bill gets a hearing. That you can't do what I know happens in Kansas, and I'm guessing it happens in Utah too, is that you have one or two people in the House and in the Senate who can decide whether a bill goes to a committee for a hearing. In Colorado, they don't do that. Every bill, no matter who introduced it, they do limit legislators to 5 bills during the session, which I think is very good. But
I would vote for that.
yeah, absolutely. Even without the everybody gets a hearing, but that way, people can get their voices heard. Even if they don't get the result they were looking for, they can have their voices heard. And I think that's essential to being able to have trust.
That's so important. Process matters.
It does.
Process matters. Even if you lose, sometimes there are winners and losers, right? But even if you lose, if you felt like you had an opportunity to have your voice, you're so right, Governor.
In 2016, Capitol Police investigated not quite 900 threats against members of Congress. By 2021, they investigated just shy of 10,000. Now, this wasn't lawmaker on lawmaker violence, but I have to imagine the people making these threats are taking rhetorical cues from the people in public office. What do we do about that?
Shut down social media. I mean, it is really a problem, and I think one that adds significantly to this polarization because everybody's able to now live in their own little bubble. I mean, we've always had a little bit of that going on. You get a legislator who lives in a very red district, and so comes into Topeka and, is going to think only about red issues. But now it's just gotten to the point where not only that politician, but everybody in that politician's district can live in that same, bubble where you've got, loud voices sending lots of messages to behave in this certain kind of way. And I think until we are able to do something about that, we're going to have a very hard time getting these conversations to make any difference.
Yeah, this is something we talked a lot about when we were looking at this initiative, that tenfold increase in threats of violence. Stanford ran some experiments, and I had done an ad with my opponent in 2020 about kind of like the one with Governor Polis and the one that you did with Governor Parson, and that's actually where the idea came. That ad was submitted by a professor to the Stanford experiment, and they had 30,000 people, and they showed them some of these what they called interventions, and then measured their feelings toward the other party before and afterwards, and found that these ads, and one of the reasons I asked my fellow governors to do these ads, they had a depolarizing effect, specifically when it comes towards feelings of violence towards the other party. So there is science behind this stuff, and what it does is it shows the other side that Governor Parson or Governor Kelly isn't crazy. They're not who they thought they were when they're sitting there eating barbecue together and talking about the Chiefs, right? That we used to, as a country, political identity when we were growing up was way down on the list, right? When you met somebody, you didn't introduce yourself as a Republican or a Democrat. When you were going to date someone, you didn't ask what their political party was until, I don't know, like the third date or fourth date, maybe. Sometimes you were married before you found out. It was always, I'm an American, I'm a Texan, I'm a Utahn, a Kansan. Or it was, I'm a Cowboys fan. We had whatever. Sorry, Cowboys. Jordan Love went. I just have to, since I'm here. Jordan Love, Utah State University, my alma mater. Sorry about that. But that's the stuff, right? And then eventually we got down to Republican and Democrat. Now that is our identity. And this, I love what you said about the being caught in our own bubbles, right? It's easier than ever to do that, and to never have to talk to anybody or associate with anybody who's different than us. And that's just so extraordinarily dangerous. It's never been like that in our country, and I think we have to be very careful about that. My wife Abby, who's here with us tonight, First Lady of Utah, she always says it's hard to hate up close. And the more opportunities we get to have connection, real connection, not the fake connection on our phones. You know, people are lonelier than ever before. We know there's a tremendous amount of data around loneliness. Professor Robert Putnam, Bowling Alone 20 years ago now, we know we've learned how dangerous loneliness is, and we need that belonging. And if we're not getting it in the traditional ways, because the ways we used to get it, fewer religion, you know, that's one area where we met new people and had a community. But if you're not religious, okay, well, these service organizations like the Rotary Club or Lions Clubs, well, now everybody's over 70 that's going to Rotary Club. Sorry, any younger Rotarians, I apologize. But everybody used to be involved in some of these places, and now they're not. So now we're finding it in these unhealthy tribes, right? We're finding it on social media. Like if I don't have any real friends, at least we can hate the same people together on Facebook. That's what we're doing, and that's so dangerous and so unhealthy. And so we have to find new ways to connect, real connection with people who are different than us. And I think that's the stuff that can help us out of this.
I mean, given the strength of those identities, someone can attack not your character, but your ideas, and it can still feel quite personal. What have you both learned about, as elected officials, about not taking disagreement personally?
Well, I started that way back when I started working with those hard to work with kids, because they called me every name in the book, and I mean, even physically assaulting, those kind. I learned very early on, you know, that was their issue, not mine, and I didn't make it personal. And I've been the same way in politics ever since I took a Senate seat in the Kansas Senate. You know, I really knew it was my job. You know, it's not me. It's my job. And so I just had to figure out what I wanted to get done and how I could get that done. And not knowing full well that in politics, you know, the slurs are going to come, you know, the name calling is going to come, all of that kind of stuff is going to happen. And just be able to put that aside, look past that to see what the real issue is, and then go for a solution.
Yeah, no, it's hard. I mean, and everybody says, you must have thick skin to be in politics. And I'm like, I don't really have thick skin. I don't know that anybody really does. You do? I love that. I love that, Governor. So I'm going to say, I'm going to disagree with Governor Kelly. I don't believe it. And what I mean by that is, like, you feel it. I don't respond to it, and so I try to ignore it, and I guess that's what thick skin really means. But nobody likes to be called names or attacked, and I think that's critical. We've gotten away from persuasion in politics. The goal historically of political parties has been to try to convince you to join our side, right? We don't do that anymore. We don't try to, again, I'm speaking generally, most political parties, most political operatives, most candidates aren't trying to convince anybody to join their side anymore. It's kind of an immutable characteristic. Like you're born a Republican or you're born a Democrat, and so I'm gonna keep you by tearing down the other side and making you think the other side is awful. But I always ask people, when did you ever change your mind when you were attacked? Have you ever changed your mind when someone told you were an idiot, just a terrible human being? It does the exact opposite. It actually makes you dig in, and so yeah. I understand that some people, when they get so attached to an identity, when you attack an idea, it does feel like a personal attack, and that's a choice we all have to make, right? I always encourage people to look at the heart of the person even more than the words. And I screw this up all the time. It's really hard to be the disagree better guy when you're like, I'm in cycle, I'm running in 2024. And so I say dumb stuff all of the time. I respond too quickly. I don't think through it. I'm in a press conference and I'll say something I regret. I called on immigration, I said, members of Congress, they're all imbeciles and they should all be thrown out of office, right? And you loved it when I said that. I know you did. I know you did. In fact, I told this story. There's an amazing organization out there called Braver Angels, and their whole thing is depolarization. This work is all they do. I was at the Braver Angels convention in Gettysburg, right? I mean, just feet from where the greatest example of this, Abraham Lincoln, saved our country. And I told him this, I was telling them this story about a time I screwed up. They didn't know it was a story about me screwing up. And I said, Congress, they're all imbeciles and they should be thrown out. And they all started clapping. And I'm like, no, like you're the only group in the country who shouldn't love that, right? But my point was, how many members of Congress said, gosh, you know what? He's right, I'm an imbecile, and I should quit. Like, not one of them. So it's just not effective, right? And so again, I think we need to understand how to engage people without turning them off, and then to be slow to take offense. Someone wise once told me that if you get hurt and take offense and cut off somebody who offends you, you'll never get anything done, because I've been offended by probably every member of my legislature at some point, and the person who disagrees with me on an issue now, I may need them on an issue next year or a month from now. So they're, just because we disagree, they're not my enemy, and it's my choice whether they become my enemy or not. I get to choose that. They don't get to choose that.
So when you do craft your tone and your language to avoid cutting off those relationships and ensuring that you can still work with people with whom you disagree, I know for a fact there are members of both of your parties who think you have capitulated these rhetorical tools that allow you to just plow ahead and get done what our party wants to get done. What do you do about them?
Well, I think this goes back to something, Governor, that you said earlier. And so I believe in non-zero-sum thinking. I believe that there are win-wins out there, and we should always be looking for them. But sometimes politics is binary. Sometimes my team wins and your team loses, and sometimes your team wins and my team loses. You can't elect two candidates, right? Somebody has to lose. The bill passes or it doesn't. Now, we can work to improve the bill. We can make sure that there are, and this is going back to what Governor Kelly said, process really matters. People usually are okay losing if they felt like it was fair. It's when they feel like it's not fair, that they didn't have a chance to be heard, that's when you lose trust. That goes back to that ethical behavior thing. And once you lose trust, it's really hard to win that back. And so I keep telling, again, we have a different situation. I live in a very Republican state, right? So my team is gonna win most of the time. Right? Now, she has a different situation as a blue governor in a red state. But I tell my team all the time, how we win matters, right? And how we act when we win also matters. I shared this earlier, but I'm very fond of something that John Adams said, and I'll butcher this a little bit, but he said, without the virtues of humility, patience, and moderation, we are all ravenous political beasts. And I want you to think about those virtues again. Humility, like when we win, how we win. Moderation, that's a four-letter word, right, in today's politics. Patience, too much impatience. You skip steps that when you're impatient, right? You try to make it easier to pass your bill without going through all the steps. So those three things are really, really important. And I think that's how we can still win without losing trust and hold this fabric of this pluralism that is so critical to keeping our country whole.
And I tend to stay away from political labels. And this isn't just new because I wanted to run for governor as a Democrat in a red state. I've always been that way. I mean, I was a Republican at one point. I was an independent for a long period of time, and then it really wasn't until about 1992 when I target as the date when the real polarization began to happen. I was watching the Republican convention and the Democrat National Convention. And on the Democrat side, you had Congresswoman Barbara Jordan from here in Texas, who had the voice of God and was talking about things that matter to me, social justice issue in particular. Flip on the other convention, and there's Pat Buchanan, taking a blowtorch to the culture wars. And it was at that point that I made a decision that I could no longer sit on the fence, that I had to make a statement. And I went down to the elections office the next day and registered as a Democrat because I firmly believed that at that point in time, and still till today, that the Democratic Party as a whole better represented my views. I would have a better place in that party.
Do you feel like you can still commit to these ideas if your opponent in any given debate or election does not?
I'm sorry?
If the person you're running against or person you're debating with does not choose to disagree better, are you still able to disagree better?
Oh, I've done that twice. Once in 18 and once in 22. I mean, it was like we were running parallel campaigns, both times. They were all about the national level. And Biden's awful, Obama was awful, everything is awful. It was all nationally focused, and I'm focused on our schools and our roads and everywhere else, and staying right there. So it wasn't even an issue of agreeing or disagreeing. It was just having to talk past to the people, because when people get like that, when they are so extreme and so unwilling to hear or take into account another point of view, there really isn't a whole lot of reason to have conversations. I would go look for others to do that. First, I had to beat them, and I did. And then I really turned my sights onto the legislature, where I had been for 14 years, good relationships with them, and I turned that, even knowing full well who I disagreed with there on most policy issues, I still made every effort, like I always had, to bring them into the office, sit down, talk about issues.
Yeah, and that's the stuff, right? I mean, even when you work on those relationships, and it is about relationships. I had a similar experience when I ran. My wife and I had decided that we didn't want this job enough to damage our integrity. And so we actually ran an experiment. I talked to some political science professors about an experiment we wanted to run, and that was I had this theory that there is an exhausted majority and that they're tired of the politics that are out there. And as much as I would love my fellow governors and politicians to do this because it's the right thing to do, I think I would have more efficacy, more persuasion if it was the politically astute thing to do. And so we ran an entire campaign, promised we would never run a negative ad against our opponents. We traveled the state. We wanted, at the end of the campaign, we wanted to be able to look back and say that Utah was a better place because of what we did, and not a worse place. And so we visited all 248 cities and towns in Utah, and we did service projects all across the state as a way to bring people together. Service, by the way, is a good way to depolarize in your communities. If you can get Republicans and Democrats to serve their community, again, studies have shown that polarization drops significantly, and so we use that. Now, I have to say, I had 3 primary opponents, and that was again in Utah, a very red state. All 3 of them were attacking me. All of the attack ads were coming at me. All of the money was coming at me. Very proud that we stayed true. We won. Barely. It was very close, and because negative campaigning works, and so but we won, and that was the idea. Sadly, COVID hit and made it a little difficult to that's all anybody was focused on. But I came away more convinced that people will reward you for not running kind of the crazy campaign or the most blowtorch campaign or the most negative campaign. That most Utahns, most Americans are desperate for anything different. Just looking, and by the way, the first party that figures this out nationally is going to clean up, but I don't know if either of them will. So.
We've been talking a lot in terms of red versus blue. This is an election year, and once the primaries are complete and we have nominees at the national level, then party members are told their job is to get behind whoever the party has endorsed and not talk about disagreements within the ranks. I wonder how important either of you thinks it is that these debates and discussions that happen among Republicans and among Democrats are sort of brought out into the light for everyone to hear about.
Depends upon what the debates. I don't know that you need to air your dirty laundry. I think there are other ways of getting things done and acting out your beliefs. For instance, in Kansas, I have now started a PAC. Never thought I would ever do this because, believe it or not, I'm really not all that political. But things are such in Kansas right now that we have got to break the supermajority in both the House and in the Senate, at least one, so that I can sustain vetoes, because that's really the power that I have as a Democrat in a supermajority-led state. And so we have got to switch that. So I've created a PAC now that we call it Middle of the Road, which is what I ran on and how I've always governed. And we will support candidates of either party. It just depends upon their policy values and whether or not they're going to support our schools, whether or not they're going to support fair, reasonable, sustainable tax policy. We've got our list of things that we want to make sure these candidates aspire and adhere to. And then we'll help them, and we really don't care. Now, we'll help them differently, because obviously my coming out and endorsing a moderate Republican for a position probably not going to be very helpful, but there are other ways.
Yeah, I love that the idea of not airing our dirty laundry. I would just say my party, that's like our thing. We've taken our laundry and raised it up, and so I think this is a really important discussion. It's not always about disagreements between right and left, right? There are major dividing lines within both major parties in the country right now, and we're certainly seeing that. But again, I think these same principles apply there for sure. One of the things that I think a mistake kind of the Never Trump movement has made in my party is the way they've treated people who do support the President Trump, and that's turned a lot of people off, again, for the same reasons I mentioned before. I think it's so important. Again, the question I've had more is why, what is it that's led people to support a candidate who has taken the party in such a different direction? What is it that's kind of driving that? That's much more interesting to me, and I think those are the conversations that we should be having, and figuring out ways for all of us to work through that. So it's a tough time. We're living. Growing up, I remember the argument that it was the end of history. You would hear that, and I would read all these stories about these interesting times in past history. In the 60s, through the Nixon years and McCarthyism and all of these different things that we read about, and there wasn't much of that happening, and now we're living through history again. It's a really interesting time, and my grandkids are going to be reading about this someday. But again, I think within my party, it really is important how we treat each other as well.
If disagreeing better does not require anyone to set aside their deeply held beliefs, can it actually achieve consensus?
Well, you have to. I mean, that's the only way of getting anything done. When I'm not giving up my beliefs because I will agree with you that we ought to insert this into a bill. I'm not. I'm just recognizing that the way this gets done is through compromise and concession on both parts. And so I don't think it's necessary to give up your beliefs.
Yeah, I completely agree. And look, in fact, I think it's the only way we get to consensus. And that is, if you tell people they have to give up what they believe in, they will not work with you. That's the first point. And I remind people all of the time of that very crucial point. You will never accomplish what you want to get done if you're not willing to allow the other side that same freedom to stay true to what they believe. And yeah, yet I do believe that in this we can find places. There are always going to be places where we just can't go. We're just never going to agree. But there are other places where we can, and our nation desperately needs that right now.
Most of us will never run for elected office. So how can we take these ideas about disagreeing better and put them to work in our families, our neighborhoods, our communities?
Yeah, well, I think we've seen some examples of that today. I love you working with those youth as well. And in my family, my kids, we have different political views many times. And I think that's where it's actually the most important. What we post on Facebook or Twitter, or X, whatever it is today, whatever we do, that stuff matters. And it matters not just in our families, but not just in our nation, but globally as well. We have allies all across the world who are looking at us and wondering if they can still trust us. And every one of us, I think that's the key to me, is this understanding that every single one of us matters. That even though you're not going to run for political office someday, you play a role in this great experiment that we embarked on 250 years ago. This great idea that all of us are created equal, and that we have these inalienable rights that came from on high of life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Like, that's the stuff, and it still matters. And if they could figure out a way to form a government then, a government that was based on disagreement. By the way, the disagreement was intentional. They wanted us to have these conflicts. That would hold us in balance and keep us from going too far. We can do it. We absolutely can do it again. I still believe in us. I have to, or there's no reason to do these jobs.
I think we're going to have to take, first of all, we're going to have to take a long look. This isn't going to get resolved tomorrow, and I think we've got to get into our schools, and we've got to talk about civic engagement and encourage civic engagement there. We've got to find some way to burst those bubbles that people are living in, so that they can't ignore everything outside, but that they've got to be part of a community. And in order to do that, you've got to figure out ways to get along with people who don't think just like you think. So I think we've got a lot of work to do, but I think it's going to have to be taken down to the grassroots level, because the way things are now, you can't impose from above. We're really going to have this come up from our communities and them begging us to disagree.
Governor Kelly, Governor Cox, thank you so much for the conversation.
Thank you, Krys.
Thank you.
And I'd like to add my thanks to Krys, as well as Governor Cox and Governor Kelly. If we see more of you, then I do have confidence that we will rebuild our trust. And Governor Cox, we aren't lonely here. We do have a common identity. We really are fans of the world champion Texas Rangers and so I want to thank Next Point for endowing our Engage series, and to KERA for being our media partner. Next up in our series is a special event with Savannah Guthrie of NBC's Today Show on February 15th. She'll hold a conversation about her new book, Mostly What God Does. The auditorium is sold out, but we do have the Hall of State overflow available at bushcenter.org. Don't forget on your way out to stop through the museum exhibit, and your coats that you checked in Coat Check will be at the museum exit as you depart. Thank you all, and I look forward to seeing you again in the future.